Hello and welcome to the Drum History Podcast. I'm your host, Bart Vanderzee, and today we have the absolute pleasure of being joined by Ben Hilzinger. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
What's up, man?
It's good to, I don't think we've ever actually met in person, unless...
No, I mean, you've done my podcast before, but
I have, yes.
when most of the crew went to the Music City Drum Show, I think you unfortunately couldn't make it that weekend.
Yeah,
like 3
that
years
was
ago.
the second year or something of the... I went to the first year. Anyway,
Yes.
I say that because we've been connected for years and years now, being on the Drum Click podcast network, which was a massive success. And it was a lot of fun, though, just to be connected to you and Dawson and everyone involved. But you, my friend, are an author now. In addition to being the host of the Drummers on Drumming podcast, formerly Big Fat Five, you're one of the dudes at Big Fat Snare Drum. You got a lot going on, man. You're a rockin', studio drummer. You perform live. You do all kinds of stuff. So glad to have you here.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, and we were talking beforehand, how do I describe my role at Big Fat Snare Drum? I'm just one of the dudes. I do everything. Basically, I'm a 37-year-old man that makes memes on Instagram. That's what I tell my mom when I come home for Christmas. So
Yeah. Well, I think Big Fat Snare Drum has a special place in everyone's heart. It's a cool story. Maybe we'll have Chris on to do an episode about the history of that at some point. But
he would love that.
Today we're talking about your book, though, Drummers on Drumming, which is kind of it's you've put together all these amazing pieces from your 6 years of doing interviews. So tell us about how the book came together, what it's about, and then we'll dig in deeper from there.
Yeah, so I've been hosting, it's been through so many different titles, but it started off as just the Big Fat Snare Drum podcast with zero format. I had no idea what I was doing. Most of the conversations were probably boring and had no real format. And then about 6 months into it, I decided that I needed to have a little bit more of a controlled, format around it, I guess.
Sure.
And so I made the Big Fat Five podcast, and it was basically I invited my favorite drummers on to talk about the 5 records or stories that helped shape them into the drummer they are today, or just how they approach the instrument. And that went on for a good 4 or 5 years. And then I realized that for SEO and which is search engine optimization, and just in general, if you search for drum podcast, Big Fat Five doesn't come up. So I had been toying with it for the last year to change the name of the podcast, not only for people to find it, but then also just to expand the format, because I was doing a lot of things that weren't in the format of Big Fat Five just to have fun with it and keep myself interested. Sure. And so as I decided to kind of move into the new name, Drummers on Drumming, I wanted to not really close the book, because no pun intended, but because I'm already working on some other stuff too, but I wanted to kind of pay homage to that format by making a book and making it, just inviting my favorite conversations, get a hold of those drummers and curate the best parts of those conversations and put them into a book. So you look for the drummer, and then they have their 5 records that shaped them, with the titles, who played drums on them, key tracks. It's all very clearly formatted there, so you can look up the songs right away. And yeah, it's not really meant to be read linearly or chronologically. It's just open it up, and I'm sure within a page or two, you'll find a record you've never heard of before, with some cool insight and personal stories about that record from that drummer. And the cool thing is, I'll try and word this correctly, because it's not like I chose some really famous drummers and then went out of my way to choose some not famous drummers, but there are some drummers that you probably haven't heard of before in the book.
Sure.
But their insight is sometimes more valuable, in certain ways. And so I just chose the people that had really good thoughts on certain records. And I keep telling myself, like, yes, I am an author, but I consider it more of a curator of their stories. And so I didn't write the book. I did proofread it, and I helped make it into this 400-page format that you'll hopefully want to go purchase. But it's really their stories, and I just tried to organize it in a way that was really digestible.
How did you pick these sections? Because your interviews are, they're can be 40 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour long. How did you whittle things down and pick the sections you wanted for this?
It was up to the drummers. There was at first I thought do I just transcribe each episode that I want and then
Yeah,
just do it that way? But then I realized, and maybe just by talking to people, most people don't talk in complete sentences.
totally. I
Even
don't.
though when you're listening, I definitely don't. I mean, I'll be the first to admit that. But when you're listening to people, it makes sense audibly. But for the written word, there is a certain way you need to write. And so luckily I was able to interact with amazing drummers who took the time to I made a whole form of their Big Fat Five, and I made it this fillable online document, and they just filled it out and kind of wrote it in their own way, and then I proofread it, send it back to them for approval. So even people that are going to read the book, you can read the passage and then know that like 1, 2, 3 paragraph passage is actually probably a 20-minute conversation on the podcast.
Sure.
So definitely there's things that were left out, nuances in the conversation that maybe, fit for the back and forth conversation, but not necessarily for just a book where you want to digest about that record. So
Yeah.
it was really the drummers did most of the hard work, and just I was organizing with my ADHD brain, which I'll get into a lot. It just really, I really enjoyed that part of it. It's like gardening. Same with the podcast, like editing the podcast and zooming
Yes.
in and doing crossfades and make sure the breaths make sense, and it's all that stuff.
Yeah.
I really enjoy that.
I enjoy, and I edit video a lot for my day job. And it's like, I enjoy like taking a 5-minute chunk that we spent time on. And if it doesn't work, I like just cutting it and deleting it.
Yep.
You know what I mean? There's something nice about like, yeah, we tried it. I have no problem putting time in on something to try it. And then also then immediately like completely ditching it because it didn't quite work out. And because again, it's the final product that is most important. And I will say my hat's off to you for having, I think it's very cool now, Drummers on Drumming with the book, with the podcast naming, with like you mentioned SEO. Like sometimes that can be, SEO can be like a dark art of like, what is this?
Yeah.
But really it's making something that has a title that is easy to search. Like I was in a band, Talk, for a while. Very
yes.
hard to find.
Yes.
Very
I was in a
hard to
band
find.
called Fitness, by the way. So
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. It's just like almost impossible to find, where you'd have to say, you'd have to give them a song name to search. But Drummers on Drumming is very searchable. So,
well, same
well
with
done
drum
there.
history, man. That's like, you can't get more succinct than that. Just if you,
Yeah.
But yeah, no, going back to what you were saying about cutting out full sections of conversations, and because I'm sure like you do, I produce in real time in my head, like, oh, this isn't working,
Sure.
or I need to steer out of this. But sometimes if it's a part of a conversation or a question I'm going to ask, and I know that part of the question isn't going to make the show, I'll edit out that part and then I'll just have it be a seamless thing they're saying. So I'll almost kind of not manipulate the conversation, but point it in a certain way that I'll edit out my little insertion so that
Yes.
the conversation just stays interactive with, for the audience.
I edit myself 85%, 90% of the time. It's me taking myself out as opposed to the guest and leaving everything they said in. But I'm like, God, that was a dumb question.
Oh, dude, that's my first insight. Once we get into that you kind of, you're a good host. And I got to say, I'm so nervous here because I am usually the guy that just, like you said, edits most of his stuff out. So now I got to carry this whole thing. I'm nervous. I'm not used to it.
It's all staying in, man. Everything. I'm going to make myself look really good here.
Good.
No,
Thank
all right.
God.
So let's talk about, before, I think maybe it would be interesting to learn about some of your insights that you took from these interviews and what ended up in the book. And then after that, maybe talk about, I think it's super cool. I've thought about it. We've talked about it. And I'm sure a lot of people are in this position where they've thought about creating a book. So I'd love to get your insight on how that worked. But before we do that, let's get to some of the meat and potatoes here of like, I mean, you got like some heavy hitters here, like just from the top, Jason McGurr, Butch Vig, Madden Class, Adam Betts. I mean, I'm looking down here and I read a lot of this before because you sent this to me a while ago, but Brendan Buckley, who is awesome and a great guy. So many good people.
Oh yeah.
What did you take away from, how did writing this book change you? What did you take away from this?
Yeah. So what I made a list, but a big list today. So if people are listening and I sound sort of robotic at certain times, it's because I'm reading from my extensive notes. So I apologize in advance, but yeah, I've just, over the 6 years of talking with drummers, and most of this has made the book. And I'm curating their thoughts, and I'm reiterating it in a probably less intelligent way, but I'm going to try my best. Of the whole reason why I wanted to start this podcast is because I get wildly insecure about my influences and not knowing enough. And there's records people mention, and I'm like, I guess I'm not a good drummer because I don't know Bitches
I
Brew,
get that.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so every week I get to learn 5 new records. And a lot of times, I mean, full disclosure, a lot of people bring up Bonham, Copeland, Elvin Jones, the greatest hits, and they need to be talked about. But a lot of times there are a lot of records and a lot of insights through those records that changed my life. And I'm Mr. Read spiritual books, read everything. And I'm always looking for that sentence or that comment that changes everything for me, even for the day or for my entire life. So I tried to get a bunch, maybe like 20 different insights from the book and also just the conversations over the last 6 years that will hopefully help people become better artists, if that makes
Totally.
sense.
Yeah. Well, let's
And
hear some. Let's hear some of your list.
Well, the first one is it's more of a joke, but it really is. If you feel confident about who you are as a person, start a podcast and record yourself talking to people you admire every week, and then have to edit that every week, and that will bring you right back down. So,
Yeah.
if you ever want to humble yourself up, do what me and Bart are doing right now.
I've never felt dumber than some interviews where I'm like, God, I screwed that up. Like I should have researched that one a little better or something. But it's always worse to you than it is when it actually comes out.
And it's off. I'll talk about it later. But just if I make fun of myself, authenticity is never cringy. So just be yourself, and that's the most relatable thing in the world. But the first real one, and this really helped me once I realized this, is that for people that are insecure, if they don't have the right mindset or they don't organize their thoughts in the right way to be a successful drummer, or they compare themselves to how famous drummers or successful drummers go throughout their day, I've interviewed 350 plus drummers, and there is no through line for successful drummers. I've talked to drummers that have severe ADHD and are so disorganized. The thoughts they send me and the notes they send me before we're going to hop on are all over the place. And then I have people that are organized that are emailing me twice a day, the 3 weeks leading up to our conversation. And then there's people that don't even probably listen to the episode when it's final, or people that want me to send them the edited version so they can give feedback. I mean, it's all over the place. So I don't want anyone to get insecure of if they don't have quote unquote what it takes. It's all over the place. And there's some people I talk to and I'm like, how the heck do you go through the world and stay on tour and keep gigs with the way you interact with the world? And it was a huge gave myself grace, because I have severe ADHD and I am very much hyper focused on things, and that made me insecure for a long time. Because a lot of my drummer friends are not like that. So,
well, it helps to hear about other people who are in a similar situation to you who have made it work. And I for some odd reason, it pops into my mind of some famous person who is dyslexic. I am not, but I heard that and I was like, it talked about how then he worked with kids who have dyslexia, and it was like, when people who are young hear that someone who's famous and successful can do it, they realize, oh, it's not just burdening me. It's not just a big problem that I can never overcome. Mm-hmm. So, again, you can succeed with whatever is happening to you. Also, it makes me think that I remember doing interviews with people and I'm like, it's like 50-50 on these drum history gear episodes where like the drummer we're talking about has no clue about his own gear or her gear. Mm-hmm. They have no idea. They don't care. Ringo doesn't care about what cymbals he was using, where other drummers are like complete gear fanatics. Like nothing says one way or the other. If you are not obsessed with what ride cymbal was used on this or that album, it does not matter. And I thought that was interesting.
I've talked to people who they will make insane charts before they walk into a session. Yes. And then there's this same amount of people that go like, I don't even want to hear the song until I'm sitting behind the drum set, because that's how I work. There's no right or wrong way to create your art in any way.
That's a good one.
All right. So number 2, and this is from Brody Simpson, and I have a lot of insights from him. If you guys want to listen to his episode, he's great. But he responded to what I said in a conversation, which what I said was a good session player is like a good set designer or a good costume designer, which is if the clothes and the set just all make sense in the world and it doesn't distract you from the world, then you're doing the job right. And he agreed, and then he added the whole idea, and then I'm reading his quote here. The whole idea behind this recording thing is that people are going to listen to this, and most of them aren't going to understand any of the technical aspects of the recording or mixing side of things. But what you're trying to do at all times is not give them any reason to not quite like something and not know why they don't like it. Because if someone hears something and there's something they don't like and they know why they don't like it, they can push past it. Just like, oh, the snare's weird or whatnot.
Yeah.
So the goal is to, if you're going to make a bold choice, this is how I interpreted it. Make the bold choice. Don't just half-ass a lot of these things, because then people are going to be like, I don't know, I just don't like it. This is whatever. But
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of again, the bare minimum though would be to not be noticed at all, and that means you're doing a good job. And you're like, bass players are kind of like that. Where like you're not 9 times out of 10 you're not going to notice the bass. In drums, session drumming, you're just going to play the part. But yeah, if you do the Saint Anger snare choice, then then they can go,
Well,
I know why I don't like that.
Well, and then it's not even like if you're not noticed, and that's why I think he corrected what I was saying, is like, it's okay if you're noticed. It's just if you're not pulled out of the world in a wrong
Sure.
way.
Yeah.
Or if you're pulled out of the world, like you give grace to like an 80s movie and you're like, well, the CGI back then, I know that scene, that's a little bit of a kitschy thing they're doing, but I'm still in there. I know why. It's not just like there's something about it. I just don't,
Yeah.
So
yeah, like the Polar Express movie where you're like, there's something really weird about this movie and I don't like it. That came out.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Keep going.
Yeah. So the question for that is to ponder is just, how do you balance making bold, memorable choices while ensuring your playing supports the overall vibe without pulling focus, it's a delicate dance, and it's really hard to do. But the next one's also from Brody. And it's kind of a statement that me and him both agreed on. And I've talked about it with I think I even posed this question to Ash Sohn and Jojo Mayer on the podcast. But our statement is that dynamics are more important than timing. According to Brody, it's all about controlled strokes. And so what he says is the dynamics are absolutely everything, and dynamics are achieved through controlled strokes. But it's dynamics and repeatability of dynamics, and that is a groove. And so he went on to talk about when he's editing drummers that he's recorded, and it's a tune that calls for very hardly gridded drums. Even after he hard grids them, which quantizing, if people don't know what that means, it still sounds out of time because the dynamics weren't there. And so we both agreed that dynamics are more important,
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to be crazy off time, obviously, but if you're in a professional situation where you're pretty damn close, but having the dynamics and not just being a robot completely flat the whole time, or like, I like how he said, how they were not like, you can repeat the dynamics. So if you're hitting harder on 2 than on 4 or whatever, then doing that again and remembering the same velocity that you hit at to get that clean sound. That's interesting.
Exactly. And so, I mean, once you repeat something a few times, it doesn't become this oddball thing. It becomes part of the hook of the groove. But I loved how he whittled it down. Dynamics and repeatability of dynamics, that's feel. That's groove.
Repeatability of dynamics. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and I'll talk more about the grid in itself when we bring up some other stuff later, but yeah, I mean, dynamics are, you can tell that the artist is in the moment with you. And it's I'm sure on the drum panel, which is one of the segments that is on my podcast quite a bit, it could be a very polarizing topic. And I'm sure someone listening is like, could have a very good argument against it. But kind of like what you were saying, it's obviously the threshold is that the dynamics and both the dynamics and the timing are not bad. Like
they're pretty
awful.
good. Yeah, you're still at a good.
If someone has good controlled strokes, but they're just totally bad at timing, I'd be like, all right, well, let's focus on the timing for sure.
Yeah.
But that's just, we're all hanging in the room. We're all decent enough drummers. What's more important if you had to choose? Because obviously you shouldn't choose. It's all just nuance.
It's all there. Yeah. And then if you're going to be copying and pasting, though, if you're just going to record 4 bars and then copy and paste it, then obviously that's something you got to watch out for, where if you have some very unique dynamic thing that happens the same spot every single time, but I guess that's fine too. It just becomes a part of the song. It's just a flavor of the song to have it in the one little same hi-hat open or whatever in the same spot each time.
And I guess the caveat for everything I'm saying is that I also have an argument against myself with it. I'm my own devil's advocate, but
Yeah.
it's nice to have these generalizations to be like, okay, this is a foundation that I don't know, I believe, but every once in a while challenge those rules, because that's what art is looking at rules and breaking them. But
Yeah.
I think dynamics are just overlooked a little bit, and it's not just loudness, it's the amount of notes,
Mm-hmm.
going from 8th notes to 16th notes to 32nd notes. That's also dynamically ramping up.
Yep.
And so that's also just to be cognizant
Yeah.
of all that stuff.
Your touch, developing your touch on the drums, and getting your own sound.
Absolutely. And I actually didn't realize it is the next thing. Like the grid and stuff this is from Yuri Ruli from MXPX. And he just said, time is just a magazine, which the way he said it was really funny. So I had to write it down. But we've talked about timing with Madden Class, Brody Simpson, Ash Sohn, like I said, and they've all brought up the Dilla style, which is that kind of slinky, not swung, not straight thing that everyone talks about. That was, maybe it's not as popular nowadays, but everyone was doing it for a few years on Instagram.
Yes.
And so that being said, Brody does put a little bit of a method to the madness, and he talks about he thinks most people are kind of surprised at the basics that it generally goes back to, and it's not the same as a rock groove where you're just going from these notes go here and these go here and these go here. You need to go over the few basic concepts and work them up to a certain point to develop the tools to kind of, the quote, it goes on, but he's just saying you can learn it. So please go talk to Brody about it. But with Madden Class, she was talking about Perrin Moss from Hiatus Coyote, and how sometimes he will just jam for 15 minutes, and it's slinky, it's all over the place, it's not gridded, but then he'll just take a bar or two of that jam and loop that. And if you push and pull within that, but then every 2 bars it repeats, that becomes its exactly. It becomes its own grid. So you just go, okay, well, in this grid, the E of 2 is always pushed a little bit, but that's just this song's grid, and then it makes sense. So timing it's this big esoteric thing. You don't need to have it on the E. Like, what does that even mean? I mean, music theory and notes and all that stuff is just for musicians to communicate with each other. That's all that really is to be able to write it down. Or if you're jamming with someone, like, I kind of want you to hit on the E of 4 or whatever. But once you get into that, then there's no rules. And again, once you do something and then repeat it again, dynamics, repeatability of dynamics or the grid, it creates its own thing. So nothing's wrong at that point.
No, if everyone's on the same page of when to have a change or the timing, then it's all cool. And it makes it even more interesting, because then it's confusing for the people not in the band. And they're like, man, how do they do that?
Exactly.
What you said, though, about taking that little 2-bar chunk, repeating it, you're almost making your own metronome, which was kind of, I want to do an episode on metronomes at some point, but I remember hearing that back in the day, like, the Zeppelin song Ramble On, where you hear that like at the beginning was them recording like Bonham hitting his like a guitar case to be the metronome to play to. And it's like, I guess back in the day with other bands too, they would make their own metronome, record to it, then delete it. And it's like, well, that wouldn't be perfectly timed. So you in a way are doing that same thing where you're following a metronome that is pre-digital, that is not perfect. So you can do it,
And even digital, I learned the hard way that if you record to an actual drum machine from the 80s, that will, and it says 118 BPM, and you drag that whole session that you were playing along to it into a DAW, it's actually like 118.04. So that after like 10 bars, it doesn't line up. So just be aware of that. Even though they're amazing,
a drift or whatever, I guess. It
drifts. Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. I've had experiences in sessions where back when I was working as an engineer, where it'd be like the session we dragged in had a different like there was like some setting in there where they recorded it at a different frames per second. And I was like, but that's video. And I'm like, no, there's a setting in Pro Tools that was like that. And it caused a massive problem.
Yep.
So anyway, check your details.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. This next one was from Tommy Igo. And he sees this happening in a lot of younger players when they come in and work with them, is that he asks them who their heroes are, and they don't have an answer. And so his soapbox was that we need North Stars. And that doesn't necessarily mean your favorite drummer, but you have to have some sort of, you have to take self-inventory on what it means, what success, what your end goal is. And I'll read some quotes from him. The music business is a crazy journey on a path that's not paved, and you're going to get confused. You're going to get down. You're going to get anxious. All these things are going to happen. It's life. There's no way to avoid it, but you just have to accept that it's going to happen. But if you have a North Star that you can hang your hat on, you can have the confidence that it will guide you. And it's, the way I interpreted it in a more broad sense is, again, it doesn't have to be your heroes or, knowing your big fat 5 records, but it's just about taking self-inventory and what makes you happy. Like truly, people just want to have some people just want to have a career in music because they told themselves it was always a dream when they were a kid, and to make drums their full-time job, and that's what success looks like. So that what success looks like to them, and that's awesome. And I still have that dream, but you have to dig deeper on why. You have to know your why you're doing it, why you're doing all this stuff, and it's surprising how many people don't have an answer to that question. And
it's interesting. I mean, but really, it's like your dream board or whatever. Like print out a picture of that drummer and hang them on your wall, and the records you like. It's like manifesting something to happen, where like if you want a career like that drummer or to play like that drummer, I think it might be a little whatever, but like if you see it all the time and you think about it all the time, I think it does help to have something like Tommy said, the North Star, something to shoot for.
Well, and I heard this a few weeks ago on a different podcast, but it was people, and I wrote it down. A lot of people don't necessarily want what they think they want. They want the feeling of how they feel after they've achieved what they want.
Yes, that's true.
And which is a recipe for disappointment, And I don't mean to get too heavy, but you just have to look into what about a music career makes you happy, and then just hold on to that for dear life. You have to be very precious about it, which is a whole nother thing. The older you get, the more, when you first get to a city or first start your career, you have to say yes to a lot of things you don't want to. But as you get older, I think we can all go down the path of not accepting that you might have to make money other ways to keep your ability to say yes to just the things you want to do or that feed your soul, because it's so easy to get jaded. And I mean, I've had to, like I said, I hang on to that passion for dear life, because as a 37-year-old man who is, considerably successful in the industry, there are times when I'm like, I hate this. I want to move and be on a farm somewhere.
Make your memes on a farm.
Exactly. If I have an internet connection, I'm good to go. And
it's a meme farm.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's true. And things can become, now we're getting like things that should be printed on a pillow, but it's like, the journey is a lot of the fun and really, and enjoying it, and not like you're trying to skip things and get ahead and just get to the end and be the best. But really though, I find that true with a lot of things.
And the next one is about relaxing your timekeeping hand. And this is all based off a conversation with James Gadsden. And so before I tell you what he said, which is basically just to relax, is Axel Coe. James Gadsden is a great man, and I think he's done so much for drumming, but he's just a cool hang. He still performs in LA that I've seen him a few times recently. Yeah. But Axel Coe, who's a great drummer, I'm not sure if you're aware of him, but in Nashville, such a good drummer. I think it's just Axel Coe Drums.
Okay. AKSELCOE.
Yes. An amazing drummer. And he was talking about the song, What Can You Bring Me by Charles Wright and the Watts 103rd Street Rhythm Band. And the album's You're So Beautiful from 1970. And it's a 3.5-minute song of James Gadsden just doing 16th note, his traditional, the Gadsden
he's
groove.
The friggin' master of this absolute shuffle straight, shuffle, whatever. He's just the king.
Exactly. And this song is 3.5 minutes of him, doesn't even do a fill. He doesn't do a crash cymbal. It is just him rocking the whole time. And Axl just talks about how he would just practice that song on loop. And it really is about, you don't realize how after the third time playing that song, even just maybe like after 30 seconds of playing it, you have to relax.
Yeah.
And how much people don't realize how much of a drummer's personality and their higher ability is from their timekeeping hand. And
Yeah.
it's so important. And usually you're playing it twice as loud as you need to. And maybe I'm just looking at myself in the mirror here.
That's interesting. I mean, but it's this area, as I'm, for people listening, the area between your thumb and your, pointer finger. It's like, I can feel that tension, and then like I honestly dread those songs where I'm like, God, I got to play, 16th notes the whole time for 3 minutes straight at, whatever BPM. And I'm like, man, I don't want to do this. This is like, but with James Gatson, he's like, bring it on. This is great.
Exactly.
It's just like a train chugging, this constant, no fills, no cymbals. I mean, was there any expanding upon that, tips on how to relax, or was it?
Yeah, funny enough, no. And it was, sometimes you just have to take information and not have a follow-up, because you just have to get rid of that thought that there should be a follow-up. I asked him, because I think I named like a few songs specifically, and asking him how he got to that point where he could just play those so fast over a long period of time. And he just said, relax. And I tried, maybe I did try to follow up and I cut it out because I was only referencing kind of the actual episode I did, but he didn't have anything else to say. It's just relax. And so whenever I'm playing, I really do ask myself, and it's surprisingly every time there's something to relax. But when you're playing, just ask yourself, what is there something on my body I can relax more right now? And I guarantee the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Especially,
that's kind of yoga-ish in a way.
For sure.
Yogic, if you will.
Yeah, and I've taken a few lessons with Dave Elich, and the thing that he ingrained in me was my left foot was so tense. I spent how many hundreds of dollars we all have on hi-hats, and I'm pushing them together so much that they just sound like tin cans. Like I could just be playing a CB 700 or whatever they're called,
Yeah.
And that's been huge, but just relaxing everything. I mean, if you look at half the snare drums in my studio, they either say choke up, and then they say like a derogatory things for myself, because that's how I, respond to critique, or they say relax, you idiot, insert here. And it really has changed everything, because, tone is all in the hands, and tone is an extension of how tense you are.
Well, I was just watching, I put it up on Instagram, Ed Soph, a video about hi-hat technique. And I always was like, exactly what he mentioned. He said most rock drummers open their hi-hat like a half an inch to get like, because then I can kind of bounce my foot and it's not too wide. And he was like, no. A hi-hat is more finesse. And then he's like, open it 2 inches and get more of a solid chick, and then work on the dynamics of the rest of your set to like have it match the level. And I was like, and I did that and switched it around. And I'm like, it made me not slam down my foot on my hi-hat quite as much, or realize that how many different dynamic levels are in between all that space, as opposed to just but it's easier just to kind of clamp it down a little bit tighter and just do, eighth notes while you're playing or whatever. But it's good to just realize these things, try to change them, work on it, relaxing. As long as you're trying and always learning, I think we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, and I heard Mike Dawson talk about it, where his general rule is put your left foot on the hi-hat and then just completely like undo the clutch and just literally relax your foot on the pedal, where it's just the weight of your foot. And then that's where you tighten the hi-hat to where that is, you're not pushing, but it's a close hi-hat when your foot is just on there. And then when you lift it up, however that goes up, and if Mike's listening, he's like, that's not what I said. But shut up, Mike. But it really depends on, not to disagree with what you just said about, what's his name? Ed Soph?
Yeah.
Okay.
Jazz master, but go ahead. Let's hear what you have to say.
I think that everything should be straight. No, It's all context.
Yeah,
Sometimes
totally.
if I'm doing, like with Canon specifically, there are some times where I'm never going to have a washy open hi-hat
For
sound.
sure.
For that song, I never need it, but I do need that really tight open hi-hat where it's almost like the most open it'll get is still touching, but it's
That's how I am.
and
Yeah.
so for that song, like multiple times throughout a set, I will tighten my hi-hat to where if I'm completely off the pedal, I can still have they're still touching, so you get that tight disco sound. So
Yeah.
it's all just like there's not one setting and forget it like a bass drum pedal.
Yeah.
The hi-hat will change multiple times for me throughout a set.
Yeah. Yeah. Someone, again, I'm forgetting, so this isn't very helpful at all, but someone said the hi-hat was the most interesting instrument on the drum set because there's so many variables and there's so many different things you can do. But I forget who that was in any
Would it have been
context.
JP Bouvet?
Yeah, maybe JP said that, but it makes sense because there's so many different variables to what can change with your foot and the little, twisty things down below, which I actually don't really know what I'm changing when I'm doing things on the hi-hat.
Most of what I change on the drum set, I'm assuming it's doing something, but
Yeah, like I'm tilting it for some reason. I don't get why.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, what else you got?
All right. So Dom Famularo.
Yes, rest in peace.
Rest in peace. One of the greats. He was gracious enough to not only be on the podcast, but help me out with the book. And even I think within weeks of his passing, he was still emailing me and giving me advice. So, I mean,
Wow.
Such an amazing guy. But he has this 3-step process to ingest your influences. And this might be basic to some people, but I think it also might help some people. So, and I'm just going to quote what he read. This is in the book as a whole. His isn't necessarily a big fat 5 where he talks about records. He kind of talks about specific interactions with drummers he has, and he incorporates it into more of storytelling, as Dom, of course, you assume he would, because he's so great. So his passage is awesome, and I think I will quote him a few more times. But he said, and I quote, "I use the 3-step process." This is about digesting your influences. So I use the 3-step process. The first step is imitation. There's nothing wrong with imitation. When I was younger, I tried to imitate and steal specific patterns from drummers like Buddy Rich, Steve Gadd, Tony Williams, and Max Roach. My success rate was never great because I still needed to gain the skills, but the imitation part was crucial. Imitation allows you to step into a different thought process. The second step is assimilation. Once you imitate it and start to take in that idea, it becomes a way of life and a part of your playing. You're assimilating it. And then the third step is innovation. Innovation is when you take that idea, break the rules of who you are, and uncover your unused creative potential. And I thought that was so beautiful. And the question is just, so how do you digest your influences? Are there some influences you're stuck on, and can you, are you stuck on 2 with a certain drummer, and try and step out of that box? Because I am the first to admit there are some drummers I just blatantly rip off, and I have not figured out a way to make them my own. But
yeah, but that goes back to what we said before about having those influences to imitate, to create your own style that you like them, and then you expand upon them. I mean, that's awesome. Dom was a master of he made me feel like I was already doing this podcast, but when he came on, his philosophy on drumming just made me love our instrument and the history of it, and it makes it seem bigger than just hitting some wood with plastic on top of it. Like it's more of this just amazing just background of these players and these stories. And Dom, if there's an episode, he's been on Drum History 2 times, I think. The first one, I believe he had some crazy stories about hanging out with Buddy Rich and stuff.
mm-hmm.
What he brought to me, my show, and to me a lot, was talking about the drum teachers and how the drum teachers, which was a big part of his background, influenced the playing. And then it was like this genealogy, like this family tree of who influenced who.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that. Dom is the greatest.
Him going into Morello and Chapin and all that stuff, and
Stone,
how he brought,
and
absolutely. And kind of to piggyback off the finding your voice and your influences. This is another insight from Mark Juliana. And the title of this I wrote is "Finding Your Voice Doesn't Mean Being Unique." And So Mark was talking about searching for uniqueness can be misleading and distracting because it might lead you to some surface level choices that will lead you away from who you are. So allow all your influences to coexist that's unique to you.
Hmm.
And he talked about how if he would go to a jazz gig, he was obsessed with Matt Cameron and Max Roach, and he would go to the jazz gig and he would leave his Matt Cameron at home, but he would only take his Max Roach and vice versa. And so he's literally leaving part of him at home, and that gig is not him because him as a drummer is very much Matt Cameron as well, which when you hear Mark Giuliano, you don't think Matt Cameron until you talk to him, and he showed me a few instances, and it's like, oh my God, of course. But you
Yeah.
think Mark Giuliano when you hear him play.
Yeah.
So don't strive to do something just because it's the odd choice,
Yeah.
because
That can go wrong.
it's that can go very wrong, and it's just not authentic.
Yeah.
People crave authenticity, and you'd be surprised how obvious it is when someone's not playing authentically.
Yeah, and you saying that about Mark Giuliano saying, he's hugely influenced by Matt Cameron, and you couldn't really tell. It's no one really is thinking what you're thinking. And I don't want to say no one cares, but people are also aren't going like, hey, Mark Giuliano is sounding like Matt Cameron now. What's up with that? Like, no one's thinking that. No one is thinking that, oh man, that sounded like, well, maybe they do with like Stuart Copeland. There's certain drummers who are very,
Yeah.
like sound like a certain style, but no one is thinking or as worried about something as you are. So just be yourself. And God, that's so true about being weird and avoiding the normal beat because you don't want to be normal and do something traditional. It's like sometimes just play a 2/4 beat. Like if they're hiring you for a gig or a session, it's like that's what they wanted. You don't need to be
Well, and
unique.
so many drummers, they try again, I'm talking about myself, and I will do this in the future, and I do this now, where when you try and be weird or unique right off the bat when you're trying to make drum parts, and then it
Yeah.
ends up it's lost in the sauce. You lose, you're lost in the forest for the trees or whatever that phrase is. I'm a drummer, so I don't know phrases, but
Not a phrase man.
yeah, I'm not Art Blakey. I don't know phrasing, but yeah, it's you need to make sure. I mean, usually find something that's familiar and then just add something that's unfamiliar.
Yeah.
Or take something really unfamiliar, but then make people feel at home. And I know that's kind of a very general thing to say, but a lot of times, even if you play something very basic, you're going to play it in a way that's unique to you. And I forget who was saying this, but you might be annoyed or exhausted or over how you play, but people that are hearing you for the first time, they're not over that. You've heard all your tricks, but other people haven't. So if you just have the conviction to be yourself, that will turn people on,
That's true.
musically.
Yeah.
And
that's I've heard people, it's funny you say that. I've heard people say that about like, and to apply this to drummers, like let's say you have a website that promotes your drum stuff. You're sick of your website. No one else is. You're sick of your reel or whatever, or your whatever you're sending out that is your content that you've seen 1,000 times. No one else has seen it. But it's so easy to get sick of your own style. God, I mean, I have gotten there. We all have that where we fall into the habit of playing the same fills, or we play the same beat, our go-to beat when you sit down, and it's like it drives you nuts. But really, no one cares.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is one that I've told on the podcast a few times. And this is more of a personal story that I've talked to drummers and they agree it happens to them too, where I was living with a guy and we had like a studio in our basement because it was his house. So years ago. And so we had like a live room where my drums are set up, and the control room was in a separate room. But to get to the laundry room, you had to go through the control room. So I went downstairs one day and I was doing laundry, and he's like, "Hey man, I have like an SM57 on the ground in the control room. Can you just play for 4 minutes just at 140 BPM? It's just kind of, I want to get some ideas." So I was like, "Sure." So I did it, and I come back out and he's playing it back, and of course I'm just hating everything I just did. I'm the worst drummer in the world. I have no groove, and the groove that I do have feels awful. And go back upstairs and just another day of hating my drumming. No big deal.
Yeah.
2 weeks later, I come back down to a separate load of laundry. I promise you. And and so I listen to what he's doing, and I'm like, "Oh man, that's a sick groove. Is that like what splice pack is that?" And he was just like, "Dude, that's you."
Oh,
And
that's funny.
and I'm not saying I'm the best drummer in the world, but he was just, once you separate yourself from your art,
Yeah, because
you
you didn't know it
appreciate
was
it.
you.
Exactly. And so it kind
Yeah.
of ties into what I just said, where it's just, you could be over yourself, but sometimes you're not actually over yourself. You just know it was you. So you convince yourself of all the wrong things about it.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
That's very relatable. I've hated so many things, even hearing your own voice with a
oh, you go
podcast.
back to the first one. Yeah.
And you get like
Yikes.
the radio voice that you turn on. But now I like you don't care after a while. You just get used to it. But like you cringe when other people listen to it. But it's like, but you're putting this out publicly. And
Yeah. I
that
want
like
people
we're
to
doing
listen
this to
to it. I just
ourselves.
don't want to, I don't want to be there when you're listening to it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh God, I couldn't imagine anything worse than that. But especially with drumming though, it's like that's a funny thing to think about, is like a blind taste test of like hearing it and being like, God, this is pretty good. It's like, well, it's you.
Exactly. And again, I don't want this to sound like, oh my God, it was just amazing. It was just
Oh
a
no.
basic beat. It was like, it was like a krautrock, boop, boop, cat, boop, boop. And I was like, oh, it feels cool, man. The hi-hat is in a cool, whatever, insert
Yeah.
here. But
Yeah.
yeah, that was just a big thing. And I implore people to somehow get a Men in Black thing that makes you forget that you just recorded a part, and then go listen to it. And you'll be like, oh, nice.
Yeah. Take it easy on yourselves out there. How about we pick one more if you got any more, and then we'll
Yeah.
talk about making the book. I think that'd be interesting, about putting together a book, all the details, because I think there's a lot of people out there who have knowledge and whatever style they want to do. But yeah.
I'll go back to JP. We talked about him.
Yeah.
So you have to know when to turn off the faucet from people you're digesting. And you want to get to know them as like snapshots. Like if you have a drummer you're obsessed with, he recommends not to go and watch every video of them and figure out how they're doing everything they're doing. Like he talked about Marcus Gilmore. He saw him at the Vanguard one day, and then he also saw a YouTube video, and he realized, okay, he has this really cool ability to have a cross stick with the left hand and then play a stick with the right hand on the snare and do all these cool back and forths. And he didn't try and dissect any videos of him talking about it. He just said, what ability do I currently have that can do that, so I can at least have fun with it, and then dissect the specific techniques that you need to work on to develop that even further. But don't just go down and keep digesting and digesting. Get a snapshot of them and then go to the kit, because that's how you start developing your own
Yeah.
taste. I think so many people, YouTube's amazing, but I would say 80 to 90% of the things that make me who I am as a drummer were all developed before 2007, that I would just go on YouTube and watch what people are doing. I heard things and I tried to figure out how to do it in my own way, instead of just getting the cheat codes and figuring out how to do it exactly. Because then at that point, you don't have your own vibe. It's like, oh, everyone's left hand does the same thing. And I'm not saying all these educational platforms aren't good, but sometimes you don't need to learn exactly how a drummer's doing something, or like, well, what's this technique and blah, blah, blah. Just get a snapshot and then figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, because there's no wrong. Like
Exactly.
if you're playing in a tribute band and you're landing on the wrong, you're not coming in on one or
Yes,
something, that's probably
yes.
wrong. But like really though, if you learn the beat and then it's like, oh wow, I ended up playing it completely different, and then you want to then you go down that path, that's not wrong. That's what you're saying, is that you make your own style, and then it's even better than what you anticipated. Because if you learn it exactly, what are you going to do with that beyond just playing in that tribute band? But if you learn your own style, you can take it to your own band. You can take it, you can teach it to other people. I think that's pretty valuable. That's a good lesson.
Yeah. I mean, there's no wrong technique as long as you're able to execute what you want to execute. Like there's no friction in your playing and you're not hurting yourself. And then I guess as a small little like a subset of that, you're getting good tones, which is completely subjective. So I don't really want to add that. But as long as you don't have friction and you're not hurting yourself, there's no wrong technique.
Yeah.
And I hope Dave Bielich walks in right behind me right now and disagrees, but
hits you with a frying pan or something. But
exactly. Yeah.
No, I mean, there's wrong technique if you're hurting yourself.
Exactly.
But there's no wrong technique if you're sounding good, being healthy, whatever. There's always someone out there who likes what you're doing. There's always also someone out there who doesn't like what you're doing. So you got to forget about that and not worry about.
Usually that's me, not liking my own playing, but
to
yeah,
yourself.
totally. Exactly.
Well, I will say you're a great drummer and you're killing it. And you're it's cool to have been for me to be doing the podcast for, I guess I'm 6 years too. I think we probably started right around the same time, like 2018 ish.
I was the end of that year. You were at the beginning of that year. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, but what I'm getting at is it's cool to have seen how many different things you're doing. And it's like, it's just neat to be in the media world of drumming because there's
Mm-hmm.
so many different, it's not just playing the drums in bands. Cause like you said, with making money and being a drummer and in the drum world, um, I mean, I make some money off the podcast, but this is in by no means could I support my family doing this. So this is like my way of being still in the drum world and the community. So
Mm-hmm.
again, what I'm getting at is for creating this book, doing all this stuff, maybe that's an outlet for people to get involved with the drum media community. How long did this take you to make?
Oh, bud. I would say a year and a half. I think I started kind of toying with the idea in August of 2023, maybe June of 2023.
Okay.
And then the book was released in December of 2024. And I mean, I'm not saying I worked every day on it. I was gone on tour for maybe 10 months last year in 2024.
Yeah.
And it was kind of in between sound checks and whatnot. But, and of course, I do a million other things for big fat snare drums. So there was a lot of work, but it was just kind of, I told myself I was going to do it. And then there was a few months where I was like, what, am I ever going to make this happen? Because what we'll talk about in a second with Amazon, I got to make a book proposal and I have to go through a publishing house and all this stuff. And it was just like, I tried to get tunnel vision of just getting the book done and then I'd figure that out. But I went through bouts of not knowing if it was actually going to come to fruition, but about a year and a half.
Okay. I think you are like me and a lot of other people where like, and it probably sometimes is like detrimental to our health, but like I have to be always doing something, which is then like I'm always like working on the next thing. If it's a podcast or whatever, or just like, side gig stuff, like I just can't not be doing something. And I think you're the same way where it's like, why not? Like it's fun. We're our own worst enemies in a way because we're like no one was holding a gun to your head to make this book, but I'm sure that you're glad you did it now that it's out.
Well, yeah, and I'm my audience. I always make things for myself. And I was insecure about my influences. And so that's why I did the Big Fat Five format, because I wanted to make people be like, okay, in the comfort of their own car, they can learn more about records. And same with the book. It's just, I wanted this, I made this book for a group of me's that are insecure about their influences and want to learn more and have cool insights about certain records. And yeah, that was always the motivation. If there was another little young Ben out there that felt like I don't know enough cool records, this was the book for you.
Yeah. Everyone's insecure about something. I mean,
Exactly. Oh,
literally
yeah.
everyone is. And if you're
Yeah,
not,
yeah.
then good for you, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, then call me up. I need to get some insight. Jeez.
Yeah, yeah. They're like, no, I'm not calling you, dude.
Yeah, I'm not calling you insecure guy.
Yeah, yeah. Talk about the publishing side of things because the nuts and bolts of it's like a behemoth thing. Like maybe 20 years ago, it'd be like making a book. How the heck do you do that? You got to go through Penguin Random House or something. We
Mm-hmm.
live in a different time now. So how did you go about getting this puppy distributed to the world?
Yeah. So again, I went down the rabbit hole of I was halfway through a book proposal, that's a whole nother 20 pages of explaining the book and then hoping that someone pays you in advance to then continue doing the book. And then you come out and then you have to, earn the advance back before you actually make money, and
Yeah.
and then I've read horror stories of people that only make about 10% of the book. Like the publishing house takes away 90%. If you buy a book for $20, the author's getting about $1.50,
Yep. Which if
and
you sell 1,000,000 books, that's not
sure.
bad. But
But
come on.
that was
I
not
hope
my
you sell
goal.
1,000,000.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's so it was just very underwhelming or overwhelming, I guess. And there were many times, and I was like, "Is this ever going to do anything? Is this ever going to come to fruition? Should I, publish it myself?" And that's when I was like, "Okay, I am familiar with the behind the scenes of Amazon's infrastructure,"
Yep.
and so I looked into KDP, which is I
Yep.
think Kindle demand or Kindle on
Direct
demand print.
or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
KDP just means that before you purchase this book, it does not exist. And so what I do is I upload the manuscript, which, to pause for a second, just the formatting, I use InDesign. I had someone help me with the cover. I mean, the formatting of it. And if you have any questions, by all means, hit me up. I would love to talk to you about it. But the formatting of all this stuff on how to upload it in the proper format to get it to Amazon was probably the hardest part of the book.
Oh, yeah.
But now that I have it, it's easy and I can help anyone who wants to know. But you just upload the manuscript, upload the cover. There's all templates there, and you can order author proofs, which just means they literally print the book up, send it to you, and you approve it. So you get a physical copy of the book. And then once you approve it, it's basically all profit. After Amazon takes their cut, there's no storage fees, there's no upfront cost to print up 1,000 books, hoping you're going to sell 1,000 books.
Yeah.
I literally, the book, I hope someone listening is going to buy the book. That book does not exist right now. And when you
It's
get the
print
book,
on demand. I mean, it's
exactly
awesome. Yeah.
It'll even say the day it was printed. Like the book I'm holding right now, which is one of the most recent copies I got, was made on January 7th of 2025, and it's 10 days after that.
It's
So
fresh.
this book's brand new. Yeah,
Still warm.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's basically it. I can go in more explanation if you want.
No, I have used KDP as well, printing a 230-page manual that was for a training thing with this side kind of business thing I do. And it was compiling someone else's, the guy who owned the business before was he was printing a binder. He was printing pages. He was punching it. It cost $60 to make every binder. And then he'd sell it for $75. Long story short, KDP, I mean, I did have to scan. It's a pain in the butt to get the formatting, the manuscript ready and creating the cover. But once you do, I got a author copy for $5, and I'm selling that for $75 because it's like it's like an educational training manual.
Sure.
But again, I don't have to own anything. If it gets out of date, you don't have to have anything in your house. I will say what I have learned is, and you're probably at this point now because you're literally doing this as we speak. You put a book out though, does not mean that like Oprah is going to call you the next day.
Oh, no.
You have to market the book. You have to basically create it like a product where you need to get the word out there, which I think and then it's kind of crazy because you do all that work and you're like, oh, thank God I'm done. But really you're just beginning with now the product is finished. So you need to then market it. So how have you found that part to be?
Well, that's kind of what I decided I guess when I decided to write the book, it was kind of like, okay, well, I already have an audience that trusts me, which is my podcast listenership. And I knew that I already had this ingrained community, which is again why I did the podcast in general, to go back what we were talking about, to be part of the media. I mean, I use this podcast as a way to network with people. I've created friends, I've gotten gigs, I've done everything it's only been positive things with this podcast. And so I've made a lot of good community friends. And so with this book, I've just utilized that. And just based off all my friends, I've just been trying to get on as many podcasts, talk about it as much on Big Fat Snare Drum, probably to the annoyance of most people. But it's what you got to do. I'm the worst at self-promoting myself. Yeah, exactly. Right in front of my fern. This is actually, it's not between two ferns. It's in front of one fern is the name.
Yes, in front of one fern.
One half dead fern. Don't look too closely.
Yeah. Well, I think people though will get a lot out of this book. So obviously it's distributed through Amazon, which the cool thing is that it gets like, if you have Prime, you get to take advantage of like faster shipping, and it's all the infrastructure is all there through Amazon, which is really neat. Now, of course, support local bookstores and all that stuff. But
and I will, sorry to interrupt, but I hopefully, speaking of author copies, so to be fully transparent with people, if you're going to buy the book and then you want to also get some Big Fat Snare Drum stuff, it's not there yet. But I do have author copies coming. So if you do, or if you're already going to buy some Big Fat Snare Drum stuff and you want to just add the book on, it will be on the website. And I will actually make a little more per purchase if you get them from Big Fat Snare Drum. So again, don't want to force people to get a Big Fat Snare Drum thing. But if you're already there, pick up the book. I make more money. I appreciate you. Email me afterwards and we'll have a little back and forth because I appreciate everyone that helps me out.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing I saw about KDP is like you yourself can order like 1,000 copies of author copies. So I think they get what's going on. Where maybe you have some and you want to sell them at a local bookstore or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is great. So, all right, check out the book. Everything will be in the description. Once Ben gets it, the kind of bundle up on Big Fat Snare Drum, I'll post that as well.
Awesome.
Drummers on Drumming podcast, all that good stuff. I'll put it all in the description, or you can just search it anywhere, because now they've got the SEO dialed in to find
yes
that. So, and then Ben, where can people see you on the road? I mean, you got anything going on where?
So Eve 6 is doing a little 3-day run on the East Coast, Philly and Baltimore and New York in February, if people are listening to this in 2025. And Cannons is in the middle of writing a new record. So we're doing a benefit for the LA fires next week. So if you're I'm not sure when this is going to come out. It's Wednesday, the January 22nd, to benefit the fires that happened last week. And it'll
be the day before that. So if you listen to this in real time and you're in California, you can just
you can stream it live too. If you want to see me play a little stripped down set with Cannons, which is one of my main projects. And then Eve 6 is doing that tour. The first part of this year is pretty slow in a good way. Cause like I said, last year I was gone a lot. So both projects are taking a little bit of a break until summer, but you can follow me at Ben Hilzinger, follow Big Fat Snare Drum. We have a lot of fun over there. And yeah, I'm always available to talk if you have any questions. Like I said, I do this. It's a labor of love, as Bart, that I do this because I genuinely love talking about drums. And if you want to reach out and talk drums or suggest a record that I don't know that I should talk about in the podcast, I'm always down to talk.
Yeah, for sure. I will mention, because it's been about a month since I released an episode. The holidays hit. It gets crazy. As you know, booking in mid to late December through the 1st of January-ish is almost impossible sometimes.
Yeah.
No one's there. But
that's why the best of shows are always good. For the 2 weeks in December, just do a best of, you're good.
Yeah, the holiday specials and things like that. But with the podcast, I'm like, oh God, it's getting, it's kids and stuff. But I can't imagine not being a part of the drum community and just having this, you work so hard to build up these shows and write the books and stuff. And it's just really to be kind of be in the, the hall of other great drummers and people who talk about drums and people who teach drums. And it's just super cool. So again, I think you should be very proud for creating this book. I think becoming an author is a big deal. It's a big feather in your cap there, my friend. Congratulations.
Thanks, man. I can't fit all of it in my Instagram bio anymore, but one day.
Yeah, Big Fat Snare Drum, such a long name.
It's like, what the hell, Chris? Jeez.
Just call it Fat Drum or something.
Exactly. Yeah, it's ridiculous. I'm going to have a talk with him.
Yeah, shorten it. Yeah. Free advice. Anyway, all right. Thank you, Ben. Thanks for being here, man. Everyone check out the description for all the links to Ben's, wide array of drum media at this point. So thank you, Ben.
Yeah, thanks, man.